Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Might be also a good night. It's great to have you here today in our webinar here at Transkribus. Today we will have a look at training text models. Today we will talk about the basic workflows about training models, but we will also have a follow-up webinar next week where we will also explain more advanced tools and settings when you train a model with Transkribus. So without further ado, let's have a look what we will guide you through today. We will first give you a brief introduction. Here myself will give you a brief overview about training models, and then my colleagues will take it away about preparing training data and also training a model, the details about it. And finally, we also have some room for a Q&A. In general, if you have any questions, you can always type them into the chat. We will try to make it as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, we will try to answer them directly during the webinar. You really can just put them in the chat. We will do so in the chat for some questions, and others that are put at the very point we are talking about the specific item, we can also explain things there. But first, a brief introduction. Who's today with me here? My colleague Sonia from the user success team and my colleague Helene from the comms team are here with me today. I myself, I'm a member of the board of directors here at Transkribus and also a member of the product team. Let's have a look at what we are talking about today. You all know this very well, I guess. Many of you have already had your first experiences with Transkribus. When you want to get information out of a historical document, you first need to do two things. You first need to detect where the text is on the document, and then also recognize the text in that document. So far, so good. But how do you improve that recognition quality? We do offer a number, more than 200 public models already. You can use those models to recognize your material, but it might well be the case that sometimes the models are not performing very well for your material. In that case, you might need to train your own model. With Transkribus, you can do so. And today we will guide you through that process. So how you can set up your own model, how you can prepare the training data for your model, and so on. Here's the eventual goal with training such a model is getting the data out, doing with that data whatever you're planning to do, making analysis, just reading it, storing it, making it available online. There are multiple use cases that you can think of when working with historical documents. And we want to provide the tools that help you working with them. In short, text recognition, just to repeat, converts your printed and handwritten, mainly handwritten, because we are focused on handwritten text recognition, but it basically also works very well with printed text recognition into digital text. You can do that by using AI models, and how to train them is the main topic of today. There are two approaches, as said. You can either choose a public model. We have a number of public models in Transkribus. They are retained by us or the community. So we have a very vivid community of now close to 300,000 users globally that are using Transkribus. Many of them share their models publicly and let others benefit from the work that they have put into these models to recognize the material. They are very often large and robust, so they can handle a variety of different handwritings and different hands right out of the box. Still, as said, they might not always be the best choice. They're easy to use. You don't need to put in extra work, and they are therefore printed and handwritten material. There are models that work very well for printed material, others for handwritten material, and we also have supermodels, for instance. They can handle both at the same time, which is very useful for mixed material when you have handwritten documents that also contain printed characters. So typewritten documents, for instance, with some handwritten notes. And today, the focus with custom models, when you train your own model, you can achieve higher accuracy. You can tailor those models to your material, so they are highly adaptable. and you can control what data is in that model. As you're training the model, you're really the owner of that model and can directly define what data is in that model, so you have a more controllable output and can fine-tune them to your project. Just to repeat again, the standard workflow to work with Transkribus is not to use a custom AI model. So regularly, you would just use Transkribus to recognize your material with a public model, as there are many for many different centuries and many different handwritings. But still, this is not the best choice for some cases. Here we are coming with the advanced workflow. So training a custom model is right before the recognition. So before you can run a recognition with your own model, you need to train it. But how do you train that custom model? So to reiterate, custom AI models, they are trained on your specific material and help the AI that you train in that process to recognize material of your corpus. So you train a model based on your very material and can benefit from that. Just as a brief overview, we usually advise that you should start with a model from about 20 to 25 pages, which will give you a good starting point. And from that point on, you can add more and more pages. My colleagues will give you more information about that. And you can also, let me go back quickly. For that, you have two choices. You can either, as you can see on the left of the slide, you can either do a manual transcription of those 20 to 25 pages, then train the model based on that. But, and that's more advisable, very often you can run a pre-recognition with a public model, correct that text, and then train a model with that. In many cases, this is the fastest option to train your own AI model. And so that means that you choose the best fit for your model that is there in terms of public models, recognize your material with that, and then only correct the output of it, because very often you still might be at the level of about 10% of characters that are recognized incorrectly with the public model. If you correct these 10%, then you have accurate training data that you can use for your own custom model training. And how that works, will now my colleague Sonia introduce to you. So take it away, Sonia.
Thanks, Flo, for the introduction. So, as you just heard from Flo, there's two options how you can prepare your training data for your model training. And first option is how you get that text is by using firstly the layout recognition to get the baselines and the text recognition, text regions for your manual transcription out of your material. For this, you can select the pages you later want to transcribe.
Sorry, Sonia?
Yeah.
I think your screen sharing isn't working.
Okay. Do you see any screen?
No, not yet.
Okay. Can you see it now?
There we go. Yes, now we can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so okay. Sorry, I think there was some technical issue. So you, as I said, to get lines, baselines, and text regions for your manual transcription, for your training ground truth data, you first use the layout recognition. You select the pages you want to use and start your recognition by selecting the layout and selecting one layout model here to get text regions and baselines. The text regions should recognize where your text is, and the baselines, in essence, should recognize the lines. You can also change and adapt these later in the editor. We will have a look at it in a moment. And after you have your text regions and baselines, you can then start to transcribe from scratch and start to transcribe your material and get your ground truth. And if there are any words that you don't know or can't read, you can tag them as unclear or as gap, and then they will not be considered in the training. Same goes for the lines that are left blank. So let's have a look at it. Let's see if it still works. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can see it very well. Thank you.
And so to do the layout recognition, you just select one page, for example, this page, and then click on Recognize. Here you go to Layout and select one of the layout models. The bigger models like universal lines or mixed line orientation work very well in general for a lot of different kinds of material. And then just start on recognition. And you can then see the job in the jobs queue and can see if it's still running or finished. And we can have a look at the page. Okay. Let's see. It's going to. Could take a moment. We will just have a look at an example that we already prepared. This is the result you should get afterwards. And you have the text region, and then you have the lines, baselines in the editor. And you can see in the upper left corner here, you can use the selection mode. And with that, just click on the lines either on your page or then in the editor, and then just start transcribing. Let's transcribe first line maybe. So and so on. And afterwards, you can just save everything that you have transcribed up here to ground truth, save it, and you will then have your first training data. The second approach is by using a public model for recognition, and also kind of maybe making your workflow a bit faster, because our public models are quite large and quite robust and easy to use, and there's just a lot of data that's already in there that can be used and then corrected, and the corrected data can then be used as ground truth for your own model training. We have over 220 public models currently available, and you can find them when you click on text recognition or in your gallery. And you can select a specific model that is fit to your material by filtering it by either the name of a model, if you have one in mind, or the language of your material, if your material is handwritten or printed, and what century your material is located in. There's also the training set size and character error rate, by which you can select or narrow down your selection of a public model. The character error rate describes the accuracy during training, meaning how many characters will still be recognized wrong, so to say, by the model. And the training set size is the size on how many words the model was trained. So the bigger the size, the broader the model is, more or less. The There's our supermodels, which are oftentimes our best out-of-the-box models. So they work very well for a first step of just recognition. If you want to correct your data anyways later on, they can recognize handwritten and printed and also multiple languages at the same time. And they are only available for our Scholar subscription or other higher subscriptions and not in the individual plan. So let's have a look at that. So now we want to recognize a text recognition model with a text recognition model here. And I will search, because my material is English in this case, so I will search for something in English. And then I will handwritten or printed is fine, but let's do handwritten. And now I also have a selection of some models, as you can see here, and I will use the text title in one of supermodels and just start the recognition with that model. Now again, you can have a look in the jobs queue when or how fast the job is finished. As you can see here right now, the layout job I just did on the other page is already finished. So we could also already have a look how that worked out and see if the text recognition job was done in the meantime. Yeah, it's probably, oh no, it's done. Great, so this is what we get out of here. I just, now to get to the page, I just clicked on the finished job and got to the page. And now I have everything recognized in one go. So I have recognized my text region, my baseline, and already the text here. And as you can see, there are still some errors in the text here, and I now can start in the editor to correct my text by, for example, I would say this is work in the stairs, maybe. And then wouldn't it pick it up? And here, for example, there is a word missing, which I would like to add. Yeah, and maybe there is a word that I can't read. For example, because it's not very readable, because it's a bit lighter here, then I can just enable the text and click on unclear. And later during the training of my own model, this word will not be considered part of the training data. When I'm finished, I can just again go to ground truth and save my page as ground truth. And then go back. Now I already have 2 pages of training material as ground truth set aside here for my training. And with that, you already have your training data, and you can now start to train your next or first text model. And for that, I will give over to my colleague Helene, and who will explain this further.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for explaining the preparation of the ground truth data. And now we come to the actual training. So this is basically the most important part of the webinar today, where we really show you how to get through the steps of training a custom model. So let's see. We have already discussed the benefits of the custom model, that they have a higher accuracy, that they're adaptable, and that you can control what data goes into the model. As we've just seen, we've had the preparation of the data that goes into there, and it can be fine-tuned to your project. They use the specific examples to help the AI understand and accurately recognize the writing in your training data. So we have now prepared these specific examples. This was exactly what Sonia explained to us. Now let's look at the training workflow again. Flo already showed it to us in the beginning, but let's just have a small recap. So the first step is the manual transcription or pre-recognition with the public model. So we've seen with the manual transcription that we have first the layout, and then we can use the editor to create the ground truth. Or as Sonia also showed us, we can use a public model and then simply correct the training data. As previously also mentioned, we do recommend using a public model. It does save you a lot of time. Instead of having to go through every page and transcribe everything from scratch, it saves you a bit of time. Then we accurately correct the text. Sonia has also showed us that, how to use the editor and how we can save that as ground truth. And then we can start the first training. So you can start a first training with less than 20 pages, but we do recommend 20 to 25 pages of training data for a good start and for a reliable or a good first model. Let's maybe go right into the platform again, and I can show you how you can train the model. So we've been here in this document where Sonia showed us how we can do the manual transcription and use a public model. And now we want to train the model. To do that, we go to the models workspace. And here on the right side, we see the button Train New Model. If we click on it, we see the options of the different models that you can train with Transkribus. But today we're focusing on the text recognition models. So let's click on text recognition model. Now we can see the different steps that are part of the text recognition model training. So first is the training data. And the training data are the pages that the model is actually trained on. So these are the correctly transcribed pages, the ground truth data, basically. And now let's look for the documents that we want to train the model on. And we want to train the model with the Marjorie diary. We can look for the document here. Here we have prepared a document with a bit more pages, so we actually have more pages and we have a more reliable model. So we select this document for the training data, and then we can click on Next. The second step is the validation data. So the validation data means that the pages are not used for training, but they're used to test the accuracy of the model during the training. So what does that mean? These are the pages that Transkribus compares the results with to determine and to figure out how accurate the model is. And we recommend to stick with the 10% of selected pages. This is selected by default, and usually that's a good amount for the validation set. So we click on Next again, and here we have the model setup. So here you can give it a name. Let's call it Marjorie Diary, and we can give it a description. This is for the webinar. You can also enter an image URL. So for example, an image of the material that you can see on first glance that is, for example, handwriting. And we can select the language. So this is English. And now we have the basics. Oh yes, let's maybe also switch up the centuries. Depending on what material you have, if you have a wider range or a smaller range, you can adapt it as well. And then we have the most important parts for the model setup entered as well. Now we click on Next. Here we can have another look at all the data and see how many pages we have, the validation set, what we've entered in the model setup, if we want to change something there. But I think it looks good for now. And now we can already start the training. So this is basically the workflow for the model training. We can see here again in jobs, or we already have it here, that the job has started for text model training. It is number 34 in queue, so that might take a while to actually try out. But this is how you created the model. Now, where can you find the model? So we can see it's number 34 in queue, which means it won't show up right away. It will take a bit until it is trained. There are also a lot of pages in there, which is why it might take some time. But once you have trained the model and you want to look for your custom model, you can again go to the models workspace. And now in the dashboard, you have an overview of all your custom models. So these are models that we've previously trained, for example, for another webinar or to test something. And you can also find them in the gallery if you click on gallery and then private models. So here you also have an overview of those. Now, something that is also always good to do is to evaluate your model. So we've had a look at the training data, we created the ground truth, we trained the model, but now we want to see, is the model good? Will it perform well? And there are indicators where you can check that. So first is CER, which Sonia already explained. The CER is the character error rate, and here it's 14.82%. So what does that mean? What does character error mean? So for example, if you have a character error rate of 10%, that means that 10% of the characters in the transcribed text are incorrect compared to the original text, compared to the ground truth. So out of every 100 characters, about 10 can contain errors. So instead of 10 here, it would be around 14 that can contain errors. Something else that you can have a look at are the training stats or the learning curve. So what you can see here in the y-axis, I think that again is the CER, so the character error rate. And as you can see with the training, when the training started and then progressing, the curve goes down. And then we have the x-axis, and this represents the epochs. So an epoch is basically one full round of training, and each epoch helps the model to better understand the data. And that is also shown by the changes on the curve, like reduced errors. So you can think of it as a practice round, and the more practice rounds the model has, the better it gets. And if there is no further improvement, it stops after a certain time. So these are some things that you can look at.
Maybe if I
Sorry, yeah.
may just we're I think quite well in time. To explain this a little further, you will see two lines there, right? There's one line that is called validation CR, and the other line is called train CR. What's basically happening during a model training, that's also how the models learn to recognize the training data that you've provided, is that after every epoch, the model will try to recognize the whole pages that are provided. One part of it is the training set. And you see that line that converges, it's called converging very well, is the train set. As it's a very small set with, I think, 18 pages, it's quite common that for the train set, the model is learning quite quickly. Whereas the validation set, I think in this case, it was only 1 or 2 pages. You see there's a lot of variation in it. As it's only 1 or 2 pages, and training a model with 18 pages is not giving you a super robust model. There will be quite a few hiccups during training, as you can see in epoch 27, for instance. There might be that in this epoch, the recognition of the validation set. So the set that was not part of training was just providing a lot of errors. And the longer it's been trained, the more accurate the model will get. As you can see here, it went towards 10% to 15% at the end, so at epoch 100. Certainly by adding more data, these lines will be much smoother. They will not have that much of variance in it as the model learns a lot better to recognize that writing. It's also dependent on how many hands you put in. Here we can also see that the layout is broken. That was reported in chat. I've already added that to the backlog for the dev team. here, for instance, that's another different curve that we're looking at. We also see that the German giant, that's one of our largest models, trained with the standard technology. It started already on a very good level because it was using a base model, so one of the previously used trained models. That's why it's starting very low, and you don't see that drop at the beginning, starting with a very high CR. Because after epoch 1, usually the model is very not so good at recognizing the material, and the more it goes along, the better it learns to recognize the handwriting that it's trying to compare with its own output, basically. And this is a huge model. As you see, there's like close to 90,000 pages in it. That's why it was also only trained 20 epochs, also because it was not converging anymore. So the closer the train and validation set are converging, the closer the model is to be at the level where training farther, so adding more epochs, will not do any better for the model. Might be the case that training a model for a too long epoch amount, that the model is actually overfitting. That means the model has those values, those weights that are basically then trained during the training phase are so heavy in the model that some characters that are maybe predominant in the training set are recognized much more often. Might be, as an example, there's a lot of, let's say, Fs, so F like football, in the training set, but not many S's like street. And if you overtrain your model, so if you have overfitting in your model, it might be the case that the model afterwards, if it's then recognizing material that was obviously not part of the training set, is overfitting for certain characters. That's now a very illustrative example, but that's basically what overfitting a model means. Sorry for that longer introduction than I thought first.
No worries. Thank you for explaining. Yes, where were we? I think we can now have a quick look at how we can then use a custom model. So once you've trained your custom model and you want to try it out, because you have those like the CR and the learning curve that you can look at to determine the accuracy, but it's always good to try it out and then evaluate for yourself if you're satisfied with the performance of a model. And to do that, you can then, same as doing text recognition with a public model, you select a page, click on recognize, and then instead of the public models, you can go on private models. And then once we have our model here as well, let's just try it with this one for now. You can select it, click on start recognition, and same to using a public model, the recognition will start. And once you open the page again, the text should be recognized. So this was the training workflow. So now we've covered the basics of how to train a custom text recognition model. And the good thing is, as we also mentioned before, if you're not happy with the CR or the results of the model, you can retrain it and add more data to it. And you can also work with advanced settings, also using a base model that Flo mentioned before. But because covering the advanced settings and retraining a model requires some time, as mentioned previously, we have planned a separate session just for that, to focus on these topics for next week, Tuesday. So with this information, hopefully you can try it out for yourself and train a first text recognition model. And we'd be happy to see you again next week, Tuesday, and answer your questions about improving a model or training a model for example, multiple hands or languages. But yes, that is how you train a custom model in Transkribus, which means I can now hand back to you, Flo, for the wrap-up and the questions.
Thank you very much. We're just answering another question in the chat. So let me briefly jump back to the slides as I open them. And then we also have time for some Q&A. There are a couple of interesting questions. You can add more in the meantime if you want. And then we can have a look at them. So Let me just choose the correct one. And so, great. Let's just quickly wrap it up and then have a look at the questions because they're always very interesting. In short, just to reiterate, Transkribus is your AI-powered ally. That's basically what we try to deliver as a cooperative. And that's already the keyword. Who is behind Transkribus? A cooperative. We are more than 200 members globally, so more than 30 countries. I think we're now at 35 countries. All over the world, many universities, many archives, many communes, businesses, and also a lot of private persons that are basically our shareholders, so to speak. But as a cooperative, we are a somewhat interesting corporate form. We are for profit, so by legal definition, we are trying to be profitable, but still as a cooperative, we have our own statutes that we are not sharing any dividends. We're not giving any shareholder payouts from our statutes. So basically, every euro that we turn over, we are reinvesting into the platform. So the sole purpose of our cooperative is basically to maintain and further develop Transkribus. So we're here and very passionate to do that with members from all over the world, which is really great to have. Also as a network, also in terms of knowledge. So we have so many contacts all over the world, and it's great to have all of this input. Here you can see our family photo from our last user conference last year. We had it in February here in Innsbruck, where our headquarters is in Austria. And we always take the opportunity to take a family photo as it happens with every family gathering. As you might know, you also need to have some evidence of it. I said we are trying to be profitable at least so we can further develop and maintain the platform. For that, we have switched to a paid for plan system back in January, where we have different subscription plans where you can subscribe to the software. So you can have different access tiers with different features and amounts of pages that you can process per billing period. And these are called free scholar team organization. As we are coming from academia, we really try to be as open as possible and as free as possible, so every user still has the option to process quite big amounts of 50 credits per month for free. And for more advanced features, which are more significant in terms of development cost, we've introduced the paid for plans like the Scholar plan, where you can then have access to the supermodels, for instance. That being said, our mission is to have the best tools and to provide the best tools for working and processing historical data. So we are taking care of the technical part, and you, as the experts with the historical part and material, you can take care of the more fun part. So working with that material, which is actually more fun, as many of you can tell. As said, we're coming from academia. That's why we also have a scholarship program where we're providing a lot of, I think now we're close to 500 scholarships that we have granted over the last years. A lot of scholarships to students and aspiring researchers, but also to teachers that basically get free access to the software, can process their projects for thesis, for instance, and use Transkribus to unlock historical resources with their research. We also have a very extensive help center. I've shared one article at least before in the chat. So if you have any questions, always try to have a look at the help center first, because there you might get an answer quicker, even though we try to be really quick in terms of user support in our help desk. So with tickets, we have a lot of tickets. We always try to answer your questions as good as possible. And we also try to provide a lot of information through these very webinars as we have it today. We will have the next one next week, as Helene has already explained. There we will dive a little bit more deeper into the specifics of training models, where we will also have look at more advanced settings and also explain some more, as we had it before, tricky parts of training a model when it comes to layout, when it comes to preparing training data that is not very favorable, when it comes to baselines that are not very straight. So really handling those tricky questions, we will try to cover that in next week's webinar. We will also try to introduce Transkribus to other languages, and we will have an Italian webinar at the end of November, and also more tailored towards the editor webinar on the beginning of December, where we will talk about all the settings in the editor, how you can work with the editor when you're editing text, etc. You can check all of them out on our events page. So we try to update it regularly, so you can always sign up for these webinars and join us when we talk about specific aspects of Transkribus. That being said, we have time for some questions. I first would jump back to one question from the chat, and then we can go on from there. We have also prepared some questions, or basically some bullet points of questions that we've received in advance. We will try to address them, and then also those in the chat. To come back to that question, or basically remark, is that layout is certainly a very tricky aspect of training a model. So from a technical perspective, we have the saying internally that actually text is a somewhat more solved problem than layout. So for text, you can train your model. If baselines are fine, then your model will also provide decent results. But if your layout is not very clean, and you have maybe layouts where lines are slanted, warped, skewed, vertical, diagonal, you name it. Basically, back in the times, our ancestors did not really care about nice formatting, so they were writing all over the place. In these cases, it might well be the case that layout really proves to be the tougher cookie to crack before even reaching that level of training a text model. That's definitely something that we will also try to address next week. There are a number of things to consider when it comes to layout. Also the shape of the material itself. So in terms of how well the material is preserved, how well the scans were lit, etc. That being said, let's quickly have a look at some question. There's one question about the dictionary. So there's some form of dictionary. We call it language model. There's also the setting when you run a recognition that you can switch on. That language model, which is basically a list of characters and words that are contained in your training material. That might improve the recognition quite significantly, especially if you're running recognition on a very homogeneous corpus, as you might have trained your model for maybe a smaller amount of hands, maybe sometimes even just one hand. Then the switching on of that language model, which is stored by default and created by default when you train your own model, might improve your results significantly. So that is already something that can be turned on. There's often the request, and we are still looking into it, of providing lists, for instance, when it comes to names, because names are, generally speaking, also a very tough problem when it comes to recognition, because they are not very common, let's say, from a statistical point of view in training data. So if you have a name like, I don't know, Howard Hughes or something in your training material, might be the case that it's there 2 or 3 times. So the model will not learn that character string very well. But the characters itself could learn it quite well still. But when it comes to recognition, recognizing a name that is quite similar to that, it differs, there the model might already struggle. And in that case, providing lists of names, for instance, could improve the recognition. Technically, it's not implemented at the moment. Then let's have a look if there are other questions. The layout deletion question is already answered.
Maybe one question about how Transkribus works. There is one question that asks, does the software predict words, or is it actually looking at the shape of the words? Maybe you can answer that.
It's basically character-based. So it's a combination of characters and sequences of characters. So when the model tries to learn, basically also during the training process, it's already applying this technique. The model tries to generate some form of output. So it tries to guess basically string of characters. And that string of characters, so you might call it a word, but it can also be just a part of the word, has some confidence that it's outputted during the model training. And the more confident the model is, the higher it ranks that word, because it outputs a number of different strings, and then the most confident one will be chosen. And during training, these confidence values will be improved over and over again. So after these epochs, as we have seen before, the confidence mechanism will reach a level where the model can reliably predict these strings. So during training, it will take the training data, which it can always use to, as ground truth, as the name says, to consult as the truth output it should predict. And during the training phase, it will always output the strings and try to compare the outputted strings with the strings that are actually right. And the better it gets, the more it learns how actually that string as a whole can be predicted as a character string. Technically, the recognition is reduced to lines. So when a recognition is running or when a training is running, every single text line will be extracted and fed into the AI. So it's working on a line level, so to speak. Newer models, like the super models, for instance, they are considering the whole page, which is also why those models are working generally much better, because very often the language component of those models, so they are not just guessing from a visual point of view, but they also understand language, like ChatGPT, as you might know it. They also have that language component and can guess from, that's another part of that model, can guess much better what that word might mean in context of all other words. So they are basically having a larger window of context, and within this context, the prediction gets more reliable, more context is in it. So just to very briefly explain, so some of you that might know more about machine learning might even tell that I'm not very nicely explaining this, but that's just a rough overview. Are there any other questions that might be interesting? Or that are still open? Confidence and predictions, that's available internally. We are, so let me explain it a little bit more differently. Technically, they're available. They're also available via the API already, so you can turn it on so that for every single word, you get a confidence score. So how confident the model is for that prediction. In terms of user interface, it's a little bit more thought that we need to put into. For some of you, it might be really interesting to get those confidence scores. For the general use case, they're irrelevant. You're mainly concerned about getting an accurate transcription and don't really want to think about these technical concepts. Of course, if you do research and really want to dig deep what the model is actually doing, those confidence scores and those predictions are very valuable. We are thinking about it, something like heat maps, for instance, where you can see, okay, how confident is the model on which parts of the word. So the darker the shade of a word is, the more confident the model is. This would also give you an overview where the model is not very certain. But these things still need to be developed and need more thought. So let me see if there's still something. There's another question about when there is a mistake. Not sure about the specific question, if I understand it correctly, but if you see that your model is underperforming in a certain aspect, many times the best question or best answer is to add more training data that handles that specific problem. So if you, for instance, want to handle, I don't know, page numbers, and page numbers are usually not recognized very well, then you just need to add more training data with correct page numbers and evaluate if that improves your model. So there's one question about competition. We don't really, I mean, in terms of use case, we are doing something very different. In terms of base technology, we are quite close to ChatGPT, Claude, you name them. We are rather seeing that as a completion of what you can do with historical documents. You can also now go to ChatGPT, dump in a historical document, and you might get a somewhat good prescription. In many cases, we've also evaluated that. Of course, we are much better simply because training data is not something that is publicly available to many of the large corporations that train massive language models based on publicly available data. That being said, we are providing tools that let you work on a different level and different scale with those documents. Because if you want to dump in one document and want to understand what the document says in ChatGPT, you can do so. But if you have thousands of pages, or maybe a very specific corpus where ChatGPT doesn't perform well, you will have a hard time using ChatGPT for that. But if you have those 500 pages that you want to train a model for, you can train your 20, 30 pages, have a model and recognize the only 500 pages, export them as a nice PDF or the format you ever need for your use case. So we are rather seeing it as a different approach to things, and are not actually very concerned about how these tools are interfering with our mission, because our mission is quite clear. We really want to provide tools that are specific for working with historical documents. So no general use tools that can do everything, because that's some rule of life that if you are good at everything, then you're probably not good at specific things in depth. So the jack of all trades, as you might know it. Python implementation, I think there is a public Python implementation, so it's called PyClient or something on GitHub. So you might just Google it and you can find the PyClient for Transkribus. It's publicly maintained and open source, so you can try to use that to work with the API on your own. With the collaboration tools, that's true. So we still are working on many collaboration tools, but that was such broad of a category that we are not considering it as one specific tool anymore. So we are adding more and more tools like invite features, like statistics, like chat, not chat, but comments in documents where you can mark colleagues, for instance, and work on specific documents. But these tools are too broad as to have it as one category. I'm just trying to go through the list. Diacritics and line polygons, they are a pain. What you could try, I don't know if you've tried it out, are training and that's another model technology we have introduced in the last months. You can try to train a field model for recognizing the polygons. So you would manually adapt the polygons and train a model to recognize the polygons for your specific material. These field models might provide you better polygons, and the polygons are actually the central element that is relevant for training, because they will be cut out as the polygon is there and then go into the model for recognition. So they are basically the key. Baselines, to have a little excursus, are basically just a means to provide an easier way of generating polygons. Because you can imagine if you would need to draw around every single line to just say, here's the text, that will take you ages. So technically, the baseline, when you draw that line below the text, is nothing else than an easier way of saying, here's the text, and then from the baseline, another AI that we have in our system will generate from that baseline a polygon. So it's called baseline polygon that generates the polygon that is then going into the AI that recognizes the text. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different technologies that are basically part of the game. And when you have many technologies, there's some complexity that you need to manage. Let me see if there's still one API key. There are plans for API keys. At the moment, you're just using your account credentials to authenticate at the API level. The reordering, that's something that is coming soon. So reordering lines based on different algorithms. So as there was one question, when you merge lines, the layout is sometimes out of order. We will introduce some features that you can just click on a feature that reorders the lines based on the coordinates on your page. Yeah, there was already an answer by Helene. Sorry. So I think as we are overrunning already 10 minutes, we've tried to handle most of the questions. Some have already left. It's also great to see that so many are still here. So that really means that you're very interested in this topic. So are we, as you might be able to tell. As always, we're happy to get your questions also. Yeah, as in, through the ticket form or via email or through our social channels. So just hit us up. We'll do our best to answer. And in general, yeah, we are always very keen to see you work with Transkribus and push our vision together. So unlocking the history, that's what we do here all together. So thanks a lot. I hope that you all have a great evening, morning, as introduced at the beginning, wherever you are in the world. Hope you have a great day still. And see you soon, hopefully.